The 2025 housing crash isn't coming, it's already here. And it's shaping up to be even worse than 2008. Home sales are plummeting, mortgage rates are still sky high, and an entire generation is being locked out of homeownership. But here's where things take a shocking turn. Some people aren't just giving up on buying a home. They're giving up on housing altogether. Rent prices are so out of control that some people are looking at their bank accounts, running the numbers, and making a drastic decision, giving up on traditional housing completely. Rent prices are so out of control that more Americans than ever are choosing homelessness over draining their savings on rent. That's right, people are voluntarily walking away from housing, living in their cars, or even moving into tent cities. But is this really a solution, or just another symptom of a broken system? And while millions struggle, others are cashing in big. Because make no mistake, someone is profiting off this crisis. Today we're breaking it all down. Who's losing? Who's getting rich? And what's next for the US housing market? Let's get into it. Who's losing the most in the 2025 housing crisis? Alright, so we've established that this isn't just another 2008. But here's the ugly truth. While some people are making fortunes, millions are getting crushed. So let's talk about who's losing the most in this mess, because it's not just one group. First, let's start with middle-class renters and first-time homebuyers. If you don't already own a home, you're in trouble. The median home price is still sky high in most cities. Mortgage rates are floating around 7% or higher. Down payments? You'd better have at least $100,000 saved, or forget about it. And then there's rent. You think home prices are bad? Rent is even worse. Cities like New York, Miami, and Austin, the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment has jumped 40% since 2020. In Los Angeles, it's sitting at $2,600 a month, nearly double what it was a decade ago. And incomes? Not even close to keeping up. So what's happening? People are straight up giving up. More and more millennials and Gen Z renters are realizing that homeownership is a fantasy. They're asking themselves, why should I throw half my paycheck at rent just to scrape by? And here's the crazy part. Some people are choosing homelessness over rent. More and more people are living in vans and RVs instead of apartments. Others are moving into tent cities just to escape rent payments. Some are downsizing to tiny homes or crammed into co-living situations because there's no other choice. Let me ask you, would you rather be rent-free but homeless, or keep paying insane rent just to survive? Drop a comment, because this is happening right now. And if you think homeowners are safe, think again. Millions of baby boomers plan to sell their homes, downsize, and retire comfortably. But guess what? If they sell, they can't afford to buy anywhere else. Their property taxes have skyrocketed over the years. The cost of HOA fees, maintenance, and insurance has gone through the roof. Even if they want to sell, buyers can't afford to buy. So instead of cashing out and retiring, a lot of boomers are getting stuck in homes that are too big, too expensive, and draining their savings. It's like they're trapped in their own homes, and that means fewer homes on the market, which keeps prices artificially high, making it even worse for younger buyers. Then there's the small landlords and mom-and-pop investors. Remember when everyone was told, buy a rental property, real estate is the best investment? Yeah, not anymore. For big corporate landlords, this crisis is a goldmine. But for small independent landlords, they're getting wiped out. Property taxes are higher than ever. Maintenance costs are skyrocketing. New rental laws make it harder to evict tenants who don't pay. And here's the kicker. Corporate landlords are eating up the market. You ever try to rent a house and it turns out it's owned by some huge investment firm instead of a person? That's because companies like BlackRock, Invitation Homes, and other hedge funds are buying up entire neighborhoods, turning homes into rental machines and forcing small landlords out. So while big Wall Street firms can handle the extra costs, small landlords are drowning. They either sell out or go bankrupt. And guess what happens next? Even fewer affordable homes for people to buy. But here's where it gets really frustrating. The biggest losers in all of this are the people who actually tried to do everything right. The ones who worked hard, saved money, followed the rules, and expected that if they played the game, they'd be rewarded. But now, none of it is working. Homeownership is almost impossible. Rent is sucking up half their paycheck. The stock market is volatile as hell. Job stability can disappear with the next layoff wave. And here's the hardest pill to swallow. This system isn't broken. It's working exactly as intended. And while millions struggle just to keep a roof over their heads, there's another group laughing all the way to the bank. Because this crisis, it's not an accident, it's an opportunity. For them, let's talk about who's winning. While millions are struggling just to keep a roof over their heads, there are others making an absolute fortune off this crisis. So let's talk about who's actually winning right now. First up, the corporate landlords and hedge funds. You've probably noticed this already. Try renting a home in almost any major city, and guess what? It's not owned by a local landlord anymore. It's owned by some massive investment firm. These companies aren't just buying a few houses, they're buying up entire neighborhoods. They turn them into rental properties, jack up the rent, and push out anyone who can't keep up. And here's the real kicker. They don't care about affordability. They're not trying to sell homes. They're making so much money from rent that they'd rather just keep people renting forever. So let me ask you, should corporate landlords be banned from buying up homes, or is this just how capitalism works? Drop a comment if you've seen this happening, because it's no coincidence. But they're not the only ones making bank. You know who else is winning? The ultra-wealthy homebuyers. The people who don't even blink at million-dollar home prices. The people who don't need a mortgage because they're paying cash. While the middle class is getting priced out, the rich are snatching up properties at record speeds. And because they're not affected by interest rates, they don't feel the same pressure that regular buyers do. Now let me ask you, how are regular people supposed to compete when the rich can just buy up everything with cash? But wait, it gets worse. Because the next group profiting from this crisis? Airbnb investors and short-term rental owners. This one's going to hit home for a lot of people. Ever wondered why rent is so high and why there aren't enough homes available? A big reason is that investors have pulled thousands of homes off the market, and instead of renting them to regular people, they're turning them into short-term vacation rentals. Why rent to a long-term tenant for $2,000 a month when you can make $300 a night on Airbnb? That's what's happening in every major city, every tourist town, and even in smaller suburbs. And guess what? THAT means even fewer homes for people to actually live in. Let me ask you, have you noticed more Airbnb listings in your area? Do you think short-term rentals are making the housing crisis worse? Let me know in the comments. But here's where things get even crazier. The luxury housing market is booming, while regular home sales are crashing. Sales for homes over $1 million have actually gone up in the past year. Think about that for a second. While the average home buyer is struggling to qualify for a mortgage, the rich are buying more homes than ever. That's because they're not just buying homes to live in. They're buying them as investments. Some of them aren't even living in these homes. They just sit empty as wealth storage. This is why in cities like New York, Miami, and Los Angeles, you'll see entire luxury apartment buildings with barely any lights on at night. No one's actually living there, because they're just assets on a billionaire's balance sheet. So let me ask you, should housing be treated as an investment, or should it be a basic human right? Because right now we're seeing the largest wealth transfer in housing history. The rich are consolidating property, and the rest of us? We're being forced into lifelong renters. And this brings us to the biggest question of all. Is there a way out of this? Or is this just the new normal? Let's talk about what happens next. Is there a way out? Alright, so we've broken down who's losing and who's winning in this housing crisis. But now, let's talk about where this is actually going. Because if you think things are bad now, just wait. It could get a lot worse before it gets better. Let's start with home prices. A lot of people are hoping for a crash, expecting prices to finally drop so they can actually afford to buy. But what if I told you, that's not going to happen? Unless we see mass foreclosures or a full-on economic collapse, home prices probably aren't going to fall the way people are hoping. And if that's the case, what's the endgame? Are we looking at a future where nobody owns homes anymore? Where the entire housing market is controlled by corporations? Or is there still a way out? Now let's talk about rent. If you thought rent was high now, just wait. With homeownership becoming a distant dream for most people, more people are being forced to rent, which means landlords can keep jacking up prices. And don't expect the government to step in and fix this anytime soon. Because even in cities that have rent control, landlords are finding loopholes to push prices even higher. So let me ask you, how high can rent actually go before people just stop paying? Because in some places we're already seeing mass tenant strikes. People are banding together, refusing to pay rent and demanding change. And here's where things get even crazier. What if we see a wave of people choosing to leave the system altogether? Think about it. If rent keeps going up, home ownership stays impossible, and wages don't keep up, at what point do people just walk away? We've already seen van life, tiny homes, and off-grid living explode in popularity. More and more people are asking, why should I work my entire life just to pay for a home I'll never own? So let me ask you, is that the future? Do you think more people will reject the housing system altogether and look for alternative ways to live? Or is there a real solution that could fix this mess? Because let's be real, if nothing changes, this crisis isn't going away. And that brings us to the biggest question of all. What can actually be done, or is it too late? Alright, so now that we've broken down why homeownership is slipping out of reach and why rent keeps getting worse, let's talk about the big question. Can this crisis actually be fixed, or are we stuck in a broken system forever? Because if we keep going down this road, the future isn't looking great. More people locked out of homeownership, more lifelong renters, more families one paycheck away from losing everything. So what's the way out? Some people say, just build more houses. And yeah, on the surface, that makes sense. More supply should mean lower prices, right? But here's the problem. Builders aren't building affordable homes. So let me ask you, do you think developers should be forced to build more affordable housing? Or should they have the freedom to build whatever makes them the most profit? Because let's be real, without major government intervention, this housing shortage isn't getting solved anytime soon. And that's why even when new homes are being built, they're often way out of reach for the people who actually need them most. And speaking of government intervention, there's been talk about rent control as a way to stop landlords from charging insane prices. Some cities, like New York and San Francisco, already have strict rent control laws. But has it actually worked? Not really. Instead, a lot of landlords just stop renting out their properties altogether, or find loopholes to push rent up anyway. And in the long run, that just makes the housing supply even worse. So here's the question. Is rent control the solution, or is it just making the problem worse? Now, let's talk about something that's actually happening right now. Mass mortgage defaults. Because here's the thing, homeowners aren't as safe as they think. A lot of people bought homes at rock-bottom interest rates during the pandemic. But now their property taxes, insurance costs, and maintenance fees have skyrocketed. And in some areas, people can't afford to keep up with their payments. So what happens when these homeowners start defaulting on their mortgages? Do we finally see home prices crash? Or do corporate investors just swoop in and buy everything up, making it even harder for regular buyers to compete? Because let's be honest, that's exactly what happened in the last housing downturn. In 2008, we saw mass foreclosures, and instead of regular people being able to buy homes at lower prices, Wall Street firms bought them all up in bulk. And now, they're the biggest landlords in America. So tell me, if there's another wave of foreclosures, do you think we'll see another housing crash? Or is this just another opportunity for the rich to grab even more property? Because if we keep going down this path, the future of housing might not even include individual homeownership at all. We could be looking at a world where most homes are owned by corporations, and regular people are just lifelong tenants. And if that's the case, how do you break free? Let's talk about what you can actually do if you don't want to be stuck in this cycle forever. Alright, so we've broken down the problem, but now let's talk about what people can actually do about it. Because even though this crisis is massive, there are still ways to play the game smart and get ahead. First, let's talk about buying a home. If you're waiting for prices to crash, you might be waiting forever. But here's what you can do. Target areas where inventory is building up. Right now, some cities are seeing home prices drop, especially in areas where investors overbought during the pandemic. Places like Austin, Phoenix, and parts of Florida are already showing signs of a correction. If you're serious about buying, start tracking home prices in these areas and wait for the right moment to strike. But if buying isn't an option, what about renting? This might sound crazy, but in some cities, negotiating rent is actually working again. Landlords are desperate to keep their units filled, and in some places, they're offering free months of rent, lower security deposits, and even rent reductions just to keep tenants. So if your lease is coming up, don't be afraid to negotiate. And finally, let's talk about alternative housing solutions. Because more and more people are realizing that they don't have to play the traditional game. Van life, tiny homes, co-living setups, even moving to a different country where housing is actually affordable. People are getting creative. So let me ask you, if you couldn't afford rent or a mortgage anymore, would you consider an alternative way of living? Or do you think we should fight to fix the system instead? Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about housing. It's about whether the American dream of homeownership is even possible anymore. So what do you think? Are we headed toward a generation of lifelong renters? Or is there a way to take back control of housing? Drop a comment and let me know. And if you found this video insightful, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's next. Because in this economy, understanding what's really going on isn't just useful, it's survival.